Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you.
Hello.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Amani Jamal. I'm the Dean of the School of Public and International Affairs, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this afternoon's conversation. I am honored, very honored, to introduce our guest, Federico Mogherini. Has built a distinguished legacy of service in international affairs, including serving as High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy and Vice President of the European Commission from 2014 to 2018. Prior to her time at the EU, Ms. Mogherini was Italian Minister for Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation and a member of the Italian Chamber of Deputies. In her parliamentary capacity, she was head of the Italian delegation to the NATO Parliamentary Assembly and vice president of its political committee, a member of the Italian delegation to the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, secretary of the Defense Committee, and a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee. She also coordinated the Interparliamentary Group for Development Cooperation, and she co-chaired the United Nations High-Level Panel on Internal Displacement from January 2020 to September 2021. All of these skills, Federica, are very much needed these days. Since leaving the EU, Ms. Mogherini has been at the College of Europe, where she serves as rector and a director of the pilot program of the European Diplomatic Academy. She serves on the boards of the International Crisis Group, the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, the Nuclear Threat Initiative, and the Italian Institute for Foreign Affairs. She is also a fellow of the German Marshall Fund and a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. I am grateful to Ms. Mogherini for her willingness to share her perspectives with us today. She will be in conversation with Razia Iqbal, a John L. Weinberg, Goldman Sachs and Company visiting professor and lecturer. I look forward to a wide-ranging and candid discussion of her experiences in public service and her thoughts on the crises the world is currently facing. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Mogherini.
Thank you very much, Amani, and thank you all for coming. And thank you so much, Federica, for being here. Let's begin with the two really big challenges facing the world at the moment, the war in Ukraine, of course, and also the war in the Middle East. Your successor is about to go to the region. And Joseph Borrell, has made some statements about what he thinks is necessary in the current climate. He is interested in talking about what will happen after the fighting stops between Israel and Hamas. I wonder, as you watch the fighting unfold, the rhetoric on both sides, and way beyond the region too, because there is rhetoric in virtually every single country on this issue, I wonder how you reflect on the inflection point that we appear to be at the moment. This feels like a very different kind of conflict between these two parties.
Yes, because it's, well, first of all, thanks for inviting. Thanks for the nice presentation and thanks for this conversation. It's a great opportunity to be back here. It looks different because it is different. We were used to have for decades a dangerous level of two overlapping conflicts in the Middle East, one between the Israelis and the Palestinians, and one between Israel and the Arab world. But this one is a conflict between a terrorist organization and Israel with its ramifications. So the players are different. And actually, I immediately thought on 7th of October that one of the main targets of the attack that Hamas did on Israel was the Palestinian Authority and part of the Arab leadership, trying to take the lead of the Palestinian cause. So the nature of the conflict is different because the players are different, and the dynamics are different, and the ramifications. And one of the things that worries me the most is the fact that indeed how this new dynamic will impact the relations within the Arab and the Muslim world worldwide. I think this is one of the elements that is completely new and potentially more dangerous. And especially in the moment when, as you mentioned, this comes in the conjunction of another war that is happening on European soil. But that is not a special one because it happens in Europe. It's a special one because for the first time, a permanent member of the Security Council, and that is also nuclear power, invades militarily a neighbor. And this, beyond the dramatic consequences that it has on Ukrainian lives and on security in the region, this has an impact on the multilateral system and its credibility, and the UN system as first. So for me, the combination of these two elements at the same time, the Russian aggression against Ukraine and the consequent attempt to dismantle the remaining credibility of the international multilateral governance system, plus this new dynamic of conflict in the Middle East, is creating a completely different and new landscape for global security that is very worrying, I think.
When you talk about the remaining credibility in terms of the way in which countries view the United Nations, for instance, I mean, in the middle of this war between Israel and Hamas, the Secretary General at the UN made some comments which were rejected. Yeah, I think it is.
It's just.
I'm sorry. Okay. It's very poor for a former radio person to not. Let's. Can you hear me now? How's that? Is that better? Much better? Good. Sorry, I apologize. In the context of what you have yourself just referred to as the remaining credibility of the kind of world order, the multilateralism that we have come to rely on post the Second World War, I wonder what you make of the nature of the rhetoric that is being exchanged now, with the Secretary General making statements that have been criticized by the government of Israel, saying that he should resign, the arguments, the kind of granular arguments about whether there should be a ceasefire, whether there should be a humanitarian corridor. What do you see is going on when you watch this, given that you were absolutely at the heart of a very, very strong institution not that long ago?
You know, I lived a very interesting moment in world, in the global dynamics, because my mandate was indeed covering some time when we managed to achieve a lot in the multilateral framework. You think of the Iran nuclear deal, you think of the Millennium Development Goals, you think of the Paris Agreement on climate change, big results of the multilateral system. And then the following years were a bit less constructive from a multilateral system point of view. What you see today, I think, is, I mentioned the remaining credibility because it was the Secretary General himself at the beginning. I was very impressed by that. At the very beginning of the UN General Assembly Ministerial Week, in an interview, I think it was Cristiano Mampur, he said, you know, the United Nations doesn't have power, we have a voice, which means that the Secretary General himself realizes perfectly well that the limits that the UN system is facing today are much bigger than what they used to be a few years ago. First, why is that so? Second, which are the consequences of that, in my view? It is like that because, for sure, I think the Russian invasion of Ukraine has somehow made it relevant, made it evident, self-evident, the limits of the way in which the Security Council works. And the place that is supposed to handle the security crisis is the place where one of the permanent members breaks the rules. What the contradiction in terms about, you know, we talk about double standards, what are we talking about here? But this comes after a series of steps and measures and policies that have undermined the UN system and the multilateralism from different angles and from different corners of the world in the previous years. So the Russian invasion of Ukraine has probably attacked the remaining element of credibility because it was already attacked and dismantled before quite consistently. Why is that so relevant today? I think because we live in a moment when you have the paradox of having the multilateral governance system weakened at the lowest level possible, or at least in the recent history. But on the same time, you have the most relevant emerging of different poles of power around the world. So you have a multipolar system, maybe for the first time in recent history, without a multilateral system of governance in place. And the combination of these two elements, multipolarity without multilateralism, I think this can create a very dangerous shift from a mindset based on governance to a mindset based on competition, transaction, fights. And this is what we're seeing, a more and more muscular attitude towards each other. In that, Europe, being by definition a cooperative international power, find it difficult to find its way because for us Europeans, it's fundamentally important to have a multipolar asset of the world. We don't believe in unilateralism or in a bipolar system, but having multipolar system without multilateral governance is quite disruptive, and it doesn't work at the end of the day.
The picture that you've painted feels from the perspective of the global south to be a very interesting one in the current moment that we find ourselves in. Ursula von der Leyen said, I'm going to just read out the quote because I'd like you to respond to it. She said that preventing men, women and children from water, electricity and heating, these are acts of pure terror. They are war crimes and we have to call them as such. She was referring to Russia's siege against Ukraine. And the global south sees a very senior, very important European leader saying something like that about the way in which the Russians are behaving towards Ukraine. And they recognize a fundamental hypocrisy at work when Israel does the same to Palestinians and the world does not say to Israel, this is a war crime, this is terror. I wonder if you accept that that perception of hypocrisy as manifest amongst many millions of people who don't have power, who possibly might be among the many hundreds of thousands who protest in the streets in favor of Palestinians or in support of Palestinians or in support of a ceasefire. I wonder if you accept that that is a legitimate perspective for them to have, to see that there is hypocrisy at work, even within the shifting sands that you have outlined are taking place.
We're on BBC. That would be a tricky question.
It still is a tricky question.
And if I were in office, if I were still in office, it would be an even tricky question. Now it's okay. Now it's okay.
Well, I hope you will answer it with the candor and the sincerity with which it was asked.
And I would have done it even if you were in BBC 5 years ago. There is. And I will use the words that I found very wise that Barack Obama used in, I think, a week ago or something, to further elaborate his position on this topic that evolved over time, I think. And I think he mentioned the fact that in this situation we have a complexity where we have to accept the complexity of the situation and where there are different ways of being right, and there are different rights, and one doesn't exclude the other. And I think this is something very, now I'll be politically incorrect, this might be something difficult for a US audience to digest, but quite easy for a European audience to digest because we're used to complexity ourselves, much more than the US audience is. This to say that I don't see contradictions at all between saying that Israel has the right to defend itself and to respond to a terrorist attack, unprecedented terrorist attack in its territory. That is what Hamas has perpetrated on the 7th of October. And the fact of saying that Israel has to abide by international humanitarian law in this response. To me, these are not two sentences that are in contradiction with each other. Actually, one is essential to the other for me. And there is one fundamental difference in the quote you have referred to. Israel is responding to a terrorist attack on its territory and has the right to defend itself and to respond. Russia has invaded a sovereign country without any provocation to start with and has started a war. There is a difference. Having said that, I think that the principle of respect for international law has to be upheld 100%, even more so by those players that belong to the democratic camp in the world. The more you are defining yourself as a democracy, the more you have responsibility to respect international law. And I don't think that any European leader would argue anything against that, on the contrary. But this doesn't mean that, again, the two things can go together. You can say, you can shift the order of the sentences, but the sentences go together. You can say Israel has the right to defend itself and respond, but has to abide by international law. Or you can say Israel has the right to defend itself, but has, no, the other way around. Yeah. Israel has to abide by international law, but has the right to defend itself. You can switch the order, but the core of the sentence is the same. And I have to say, you have different, this is not unusual in Europe. You have different tones, you have different accents, you have different nuances, but the same message comes from Europe to Israel, to the rest of the region, to international partners. I see a certain coherence there. Maybe not in attitude, not in the tone, but the message is the same. The right of Israel to respond and to defend itself, and the need for Israel to respect international law. Both elements are present in the declarations of all leaders of the region.
I completely see why you're framing it in this way, but I think really my question was to do with the perception of people who are not in any positions of power, just people like me in the street, people in the audience here, seeing day after day after day the numbers of Palestinian civilians, among whom there must be Hamas fighters who are being killed, but the vast majority in terms of the numbers are civilians. And to see that day after day, the kinds of questions that certainly people ask me when they ask for my reflections on what's happening at the moment are, how many Palestinians have to die before something shifts? I think it's that. And when you're in a position of power, as you're not now, I understand that, but I think if you were in a position of power, as you were then, what would you say to somebody who sees you in a cafe or in a street and says, how many is enough?
You know, I live out there too, so I know and I see it and I do that. And I have students and faculty and kids and parents and friends. To me, the point is this. The Palestinians have been victims, not once, but twice, or 3 times. And they're not only victims because for decades they have been deprived of having a Palestinian state, but today they're also victims because they are used by Hamas as shields. And I think Hamas has a responsibility in what is happening, clearly, not only because it has started, but also because it is, I mean, it's not something that is new today. I mean, the way in which Hamas has been handling Gaza for years is part of the reasons why we're here at this stage. It's not the only responsibility. Everyone has a responsibility in what is happening. And to me, what is the most sad element to this is that we could have solved the Palestinian issue much before, had there been political will enough, because everybody knew what the only viable solution was. It was, of all the conflicts that we had open, that was the only one of which the solution was quite evident. What was lacking was the political will. But the point is this, that today, yes, I understand the sorrow, the mourning, the frustration, the anger that comes from far, but also comes from the fact that I don't have intelligence, I don't have access to information today, but from what we understand and read, and it's not difficult. I mean, I've been in Gaza twice. I know what I'm talking about. I actually paid in Gaza my first visit as High Representative. The first visit I did was in Gaza. So I know what I'm talking about, and you know where I stand. And I shared that frustration, I shared that sorrow, and I shared that mourning. But again, I don't have any reluctance in saying that if there is any reason to believe that Hamas leaders are hiding among civilians, the Palestinian civilians are also the victims of a terrorist organization like Hamas. And when I say what worries me the most is that this entire thing is attempting to shift the dynamics of leadership in the Arab and the Muslim worlds. This is what I mean. That it's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that Hamas is the defender of the Palestinian cause, while actually it's killing it. This is what worries me the most, that we risk having a complete misperception of reality. And that might plant the seeds for long-term misperceptions. And the targets risk to become really the wrong ones for those that want to fight for freedom, peace, and democracy, and the Palestinian state, by the way.
Right.
This is definitely the worst possible way to imagine achieving one. This is actually killing the perspective, I think. And this is also why I think it's wise to try to re-put things in the right dimension, saying, okay, the way to achieve a Palestinian state and rights for the Palestinians is actually empowering the Palestinian Authority or those interlocutors in the Arab world, I think of Jordan, I think of others, that have always tried to achieve that, but through peaceful means. I think there is a little space, but hopefully a bigger one in the future, including in the US, for this kind of reasoning that doesn't accept to be pushed in the direction of siding with the Israelis or with the Palestinians, but siding for international rights, people rights, and the creation of a Palestinian state through peaceful means, which is the only way to achieve it. Which, by the way, is also the only way for Israel to achieve security and peace. And I think that in the Israeli society itself, this will come. And it's already coming, I think.
Yeah. How do you think the world's focus on the Middle East is going to make an impact on what is already become a war of attrition in Ukraine? Because it's clearly going to make an impact. The focus has shifted so profoundly, and there could be long-term ramifications for what's happening in the Middle East.
This is one of Europe's most pressing concerns. The combination of factors, the war fatigue that might start to come in Ukraine and around Ukraine. Nobody, I think, had the illusion that this war that Russia started in Ukraine would have been short and fast or easy. And we know that conflicts are heavy to sustain, and that public opinions and public support, both inside and outside, can have moments of ups and downs. So there is this element. We're approaching the end of the second year of the war. Second, yes, the shift of international attention to the Middle East. Third, the big elephant in the room, will the US keep the same line on Ukraine in the coming months and years?
And the same funding.
And the same funding, and the same political support, the same economic, financial, and military and political support. And of these three elements, I would say that the one that worries me the most, and I think Europeans the most, is the third one.
And when you say it worries you the most, what is it that you think? Because it's quite clear that President Zelensky himself is concerned about the fact that the world has taken its eye off Russia and Ukraine, and he is exemplary as a leader in traveling the world and persuading people that you cannot forget Ukraine, and it does look as though that is already beginning to happen. I mean, what would you be talking about in Brussels in this moment? How would you be talking to leaders about the way in which it is possible to continue to ensure that that battle is one that is won by Ukraine?
He doesn't need to do that in Brussels, because no European would diminish the level of attention.
No, I mean elsewhere. I mean, obviously it is about
in
the
Brussels,
US
in Brussels, yeah, exactly. In Brussels, there's no need for him to make
persuade.
No,
right.
because you know, in this case, yes. I mean, I think that the war that Russia started in Ukraine is so important, as I mentioned, because of its global connotations. Because it's Russia, because it's a permanent member of the Security Council, because it's a nuclear power, and because it's a blatant, it's literally a military invasion of a neighboring country. So it brings us back to the last century dynamic. We were talking about hybrid warfare, and you know, and here we are with trenches and tanks. So that is the point, and it's the breach of international law in terms of violating sovereign territories and changing borders. So that is what. This is why I believe that war that Russia started in Ukraine is so dangerous and should be a major concern for the rest of the world, no matter if north, south, east, west. But when you look at Europe, the reason why we would not and we would never forget about Ukraine is because it's there. I mean, we have European Union borders with Russia. We have borders with Ukraine. We are there. It's home. So for us, there's no way in which this can go away. It's not the main reason why the world should be preoccupied about that. The main reason is the first one that I mentioned. But for us Europeans, it's also because it's at home. And it needed, and it somehow, it involved for us a complete change of attitude and mindset, and I mean, the entire energy policy, the entire trade policy of Europe has changed. So we don't need a reminder. It's impossible for us not to remember that. As well as it's impossible for us not to pay attention to the Middle East, because it's there. I mean, it's there. It's our region. So we don't need reminders. Here in the United States, the argument, well, not for me to advise President Zelensky on, I mean, he's perfectly capable of making the arguments. This is what would need to be done the most, and I think the main point is about creating precedents.
Right.
But not so much here toward. I mean, it's for me. This is the argument to use everywhere in the world. What kind of precedent you set if a military invasion of a neighboring sovereign country determines a change of borders? It means that it's, you know, anybody can do anything. and go unpunished and be recognized. And this means potentially war everywhere. So to me, that is the main argument, that this means that anybody can do anything, and that's
with
it.
impunity.
Not only impunity, but also seeing, without any kind of reaction or any kind of even saying, no, this is not something that you can do.
Yeah.
So then we couldn't even talk anymore about the remaining credibility. Then you would just say, okay,
Right.
we'll just
Right.
stop pretending.
Let's go back to 2015 and the signing of a really quite remarkable achievement by so many people, and you are absolutely at the heart of it, the JCPOA, otherwise known as the Iran nuclear deal. I mean, this was just an extraordinary moment of the kind of thing that you've been talking about, the kind of multilateral, cooperative negotiation that led to a very significant shift in the relationship between Iran and the rest of the world. Tell us a little about those 2 years, the intensity of those 2 years, because it was a 12-year deal in the making, if you like. There were 10 years of constant talking and negotiation behind the scenes. But those 2 years, in many ways, you could kind of bring them right down to the talks in Lausanne and the talks in Vienna. What was that like?
How much time do we have? For me, personally, it was strange. I just started. I was jumping on a train that was running since many years. And having just started in Brussels, I had many different things on my plate, including Russia, Ukraine, 2015, Crimea, Middle East, and many other things. Syria, Libya at the time, very much on the agenda. And so this was obviously one of the main elements on which I was working, but it was not the only one. And everybody was telling me, yes, we are in a crucial phase, but we have had crucial phases before, so don't expect necessarily that this comes to an end. So I was not necessarily expecting this to accelerate during the first 6 months, basically, of my mandate. And by the way, I'm very grateful to my predecessors that did that long journey that took us there, and to an extraordinary team in the European Union that made it possible with continuity over the years. How it was, for me, and I think there is a very strong value when you enter into negotiation at a certain stage coming from outside, because you can see with a lot of more lucidity where you stand. And for me, coming in at that moment, I don't think I've talked about that before, was clear that from a technical point of view, it was perfectly doable. I didn't see, I'm not a nuclear expert, I'm not a sanction expert, but being explained and looking into that, coming as a new facilitator in the dynamic, it was clear that we could do it. From a technical point of view, it was doable. And then the attention moved to the political sustainability. Do we have the space to do it? And this is, I think, the main exercise that any facilitator has to have when negotiating any international agreement or bilateral agreement even.
What do you mean by political space?
First, do the parties have political interest in achieving a result? This is the number one question. If the honest answer is no, you can still decide to keep the negotiation going because it's better to have a process rather than not to have one, but you can live with the idea that you're not going to achieve a result. Still, having a process might be good. The Middle East peace process has been on that kind of dynamic for long. Better to have a process rather than not to have anything, but it's clear that the parties don't want to get there. So first, political will. Do they want to achieve something? Second, do they have the political space back home to bring it back?
And they sell the narrative, yeah.
Yes, without being killed or dying or, committing suicide, whatever form could be. And to me, it was clear coming to the negotiating table from outside, that we had both, and obviously the third element is that you have to have the substance of the agreement in place or doable. And to me, it was clear already in December 2014, January 2015, that we had the three components in place. We had the content not finalized, but possible to be finalized. We had the political will of all parties, the interest, and we had some political space. In some places more than in others, but in everywhere we had the political space to bring it back home. And so I thought that, yes, it was something that we could have done. So that was my but every time that we were entering into a negotiating round, it was supposed to be for 24 hours, and then it lasted for 7 days. That's why you see the pictures of me. I'm always dressed the same because I left with a little bag, and then we were staying forever.
That was in Lausanne, but the second time when you were in Vienna,
we knew.
You knew it was going to be
we
quite
knew,
a long
but
haul.
we didn't know that would have taken 2 weeks. I think it was 15, 16 days.
And was it just
sort of lockdown before the COVID thing? We
right.
I personally never got out of the place for 15 days.
Right, not out of the hotel. So was it in Vienna that there was a stalemate and you called a plenary session because it was not possible to continue bilaterally, and there were threats made because Zarif then went out and gave a press conference?
No.
Is that how it happened?
There was a stalemate. One of the most interesting things from a purely negotiating technique, let's say, of handling that kind of unique setup, because the Iran deal negotiation were unique in their kind, because it's the only time in history where you have a UN Security Council resolution back in 2003, if I'm not wrong, that mandates the High Representative of the European Union to be the facilitator of a format that is set up in the Security Council resolution with a scope that is limited in the UN Security Council resolution. So it's a completely unique setup.
Yeah.
And one of the most interesting dynamics there was that obviously you couldn't have the ministers present like for 15 days, locked in a hotel room so you had to understand when you needed the bilateral, when you needed the plenary at technical level, at ambassadors level, at political directors level. So you had to how do you say it, to direct the orchestra of the negotiation. So at a certain moment, yes, there was a stalemate. We went on the plenary at ministerial level, and you called the foreign ministers of the P5 plus Germany. It's not something that agenda-wise it's easy to arrange. And then there was still a stalemate at ministerial level, and then it was not a threat, as there was a stalemate and it was continuing. I said, that was in my capacity and my duties, I think. I said, okay, then we stop, we go home, and I will decide when to reconvene negotiations in the format I consider better in the coming months. And thank you and goodbye. And Zarif went, yes.
And Zarif did indeed go out and say...
No, Zarif, in the meeting room, I mean, I'm saying this because it was public knowledge also at that time, and Zarif said that I shouldn't have threatened. Never threaten an Iranian, he said.
Yes, I remember that quote.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I said, I'm not threatening you. I'm just saying I don't see any, I'm a facilitator of this process. I don't see any use in going on with this. So we take a break, not a break and we stay. We just suspend this round of negotiation and we'll see how to move on. And then it was not a threat. It was just an assessment that, and then he went out, and then the same evening, I think, that unblocked the dynamic. Because yes, sometimes you have to show the costs of not advancing. Because the costs of advancing on an agreement are self-evident. You have to give up something. But you always have to offer the parties the narrative of what would be the cost of interrupting negotiations or failing negotiations to be evident for their own audiences. And in that case, I think Zarif could go out and say, if we stop now, we risk losing everything. And that was probably a reality check to come back and retake.
Let's fast forward to May 2018 and President Trump walking away from the JCPOA. Can you remember where you were and what you were thinking when you
Yes.
heard that?
Yes, but let me tell you before, in between July 2015 and May 2018, we had something good. Because sometimes we focus on the moments, and once we achieve something and before we lose it, we forget that there was something good. And to me, the most remarkable thing was not that we managed to achieve the agreement. That was remarkable. But the most remarkable thing was that the agreement was implemented and verified and monitored for 3 years. And that was something. That was for me the most important thing. Then yes, we expected it. It was not a surprise, so we were ready. We had discussed options with the foreign ministers of the member states. So we had a plan, a reaction plan in mind. I remember where I was because it was one of the very few times when I was in Rome. I was always in Brussels, but in that case, I was in Rome, and so when the announcement came, we thought, okay, we have to react immediately. So, a little anecdote: not being in Brussels, where do we react? I mean, where do I go to speak? I couldn't use any. It couldn't be an Italian reaction, so I couldn't. So I went to the representation of the European Union in Rome. Member states have offices of the European Union in all capitals, but obviously they were not ready for that. It was an evening. It was a lot of. I didn't have my team with me, so it was. It was a very, let's say, creative way of approaching things, but we had very fast a text ready. We didn't consult with member states bilaterally about the text because we checked before what our line would have been. So I took the risk of wording it in my own way, making sure. I was sure that no member state would have disagreed. We formulated a short text, and the main aim of the text was to speak to Tehran, because with the time differences, we wanted to speak. I wanted to speak before Tehran reacted to Trump announcement, because this would have allowed Iran to respond not to Trump, but to us. And so it was very important for us to speak before. It was too late in Tehran. And basically the main message was not on the United States, but was on the future. So I think we used the word, we regret that the US takes this decision, not of getting out of the deal, because not being an international agreement, I think we used the terms that were the correct ones. I think we used the terms, we regret that the United States, the administration, the United States administration has decided to stop implementing the UN Security Council resolution.
Because it's only Iran that could have unilaterally walked away from it.
What the agreement technically is a UN Security Council resolution attachment. It's an annex to a UN Security Council resolution, unanimously taken. So technically the US decision was to stop implementing a UN Security Council resolution they had voted. And that was unanimously voted. So I think we were always trying to stress this. It was not the US getting out of an agreement, it was the US deciding to stop the implementation of the UN Security Council resolution, which was part of the dismantling of the multilateral system credibility, by the way, but this is another story. But the main part of my message was towards Tehran, saying the European Union stays committed to the agreement and the full implementation of the agreement. That was fundamental. as long as Iran stays committed to it. And that could allow Iran to respond to the European Union saying, okay, you stay, we stay. And obviously we had checked before that both Russia and China were on board on that. And in this way, we ring-fenced for still 1 year and something the continuation of parts of the implementation of the agreement.
And now, how do you reflect on the efforts to try and revive the deal, which are completely stalled currently? And I wonder what you think about how it will be possible to just kickstart them again, given everything that has happened since 2015.
Now, go back to the 3 elements I mentioned before. You have to have the content, you have to have the political will, and you have to have the political space. I think on the content, it can be done. I'm pretty sure that the teams have worked and can work on the revision, revitalization, adjustment, whatever.
Is it your assessment that there is any will on either side?
That's the point. Is there any will and is there any space? On the content, I don't doubt that an agreement could be drafted, finalized, revitalized, whatever, tomorrow. On the will, I don't know. I don't know if the Iranian leadership has any will to do that.
It's a different leadership, of course.
It's a different leadership with a different mandate, with a different constituency, and with a different regional and international posture and dynamic. I don't know about the will. I think the Biden administration had a serious and honest will to do it in the beginning. I don't know about now. I don't know, but I don't think that the Russians or the Chinese might necessarily have any will to do anything of that kind today.
I mean, the sanctions are deeply punishing to ordinary Iranians. I mean, 80 million Iranians are struggling under these sanctions.
And the world's security environment would only benefit from a restored nuclear deal with Iran today, even more than in 2015.
Yeah.
It would be needed much more now than back then. So definitely, if you look at the rational point of view, you would need it, and you would need to have the political will much more today. But political will is not about rationality of decisions, it's also about political agendas. There has been a deterioration, and here we go back to the first point we discussed, a deterioration of the attitudes towards multilateral cooperation. And do you see the picture? Do you see the picture of the Secretary of State and the Russian foreign minister and the Iranian foreign minister and the HRVP and the Chinese minister and the UK foreign minister David Cameron, by the way?
Yes.
Do you see them on stage announcing, yes, we have an agreement?
Not really. Sadly.
And so is there the space for anything of that kind to be done? Paradoxically, because again, the word safety and security would need it today much more than before.
Yeah.
But is there anyone that today has the space and the will and the strength and the courage to do that in this global environment that is different than the one we had in 2015?
I'm going to open it up to questions in just a moment. I've just got one kind of quite personal question really for you. I mean, you're still very young and you have held high office.
I turned 50 a few months ago.
That's so young. I mean, you've held...
I feel I've done enough.
Well, I'm sure you do feel you've done enough, but I mean, I wonder how you think about... I found something out the other day that your very first job when you left high school was working in McDonald's in Oxford Street in London. And I wonder...
A very useful experience.
Well, okay, so share that with us. I mean, I wonder how much you reflect, given all the things that you have been working on and indeed have achieved, what you think about your 18-year-old self first starting out in the world of work.
Oh, I felt very passionate about the world. It was the very early 90s, so it was the end of the Soviet Union, the fall of the Berlin Wall. I felt this wave of enthusiasm that we had in the very beginning of the 90s, where the world is moving in the right direction. It was globalization and the end of the bipolar world, the end of the Cold War. It was, I want to contribute to shaping of the multilateral cooperative system at that time. So I had a lot of enthusiasm. The experience in McDonald's was for me, was only a few months while I was studying English in London. Probably one of the things that have changed my life the most, because language, my knowledge of English has helped me working, where I've been working afterwards. Together with French. But the experience in McDonald's told me that that you have to be humble in what you're doing. You have to be able to learn even things you don't like. And you have to recognize where you stand in a hierarchy and differences of roles that any organization has. And McDonald's, like the European institutions, each has a different role to play, and each is important. And without one, the other one doesn't work, and it's more about teamwork than really.
So that's where you learned your consensus building.
I learned commitment and sacrifice a lot. Yes.
Let's have questions from the audience.
But I have to tell you something. I also shared a little bit with students this afternoon, and I share with my own students in the College of Europe. I never planned my career. I never imagined I would have been a member of parliament. I never imagined I would have been a minister. I never imagined I would have been a high representative, or I would have moved to Brussels. The only thing I knew when I was 18, I perfectly remember that, even 16, I started at 16, I knew that I would have done something related to foreign policy and security policy and the world. I wanted to be a journalist, actually. I love to write, I love to report. I was interested in the world. And that was the only thing I knew. And if you look at what I've done from 18 years old to 50, it has been related to the world in different ways, from different angles. And I'm sure I will continue doing that. The important point is that you find your passion. And then you can take it from different angles. Yeah, that's how I see it.
Over to you.
Ms. Mogherini, thank you so much for your presentation and the conversation. It was really awesome hearing to you, and I really appreciate your work. This is a question more related to your time as a High Representative of the European Union time, from what was known as former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, present-day North Macedonia. And I was closely following you while you were visiting Macedonia and Greece at the time with the agreement between the countries. And in your conversation, you were talking about political will and political space, and especially in the Western Balkans, political space was not really existent when we think about Macedonia and Greece, when we think about Bulgaria, Serbia, and Kosovo. But most of those countries created the political space just for the European Union dream, and I hope you agree with that. And the political will was really not existent with the leaders, but then government changed because the people were believing in a time of the European Union. And then you referred mostly in the countries of the Western world, and Israel and Russia, and the sense of political will of the smaller actors. When we think about this scenario where the Western Balkan countries have the political will, but on the other country, with the other side, the European Union is an organization who really has struggled with the political will in the Western Balkans, and connected to the question about the citizens in the global south and what would an ordinary person think about the situation at the time. How would you talk to the people in the Western Balkans who really believe in the European dream but feel this sense of betrayal from the European Union all these years when you're talking about?
Wonderful. Wonderful question that contains already the answer to that. I fully agree with you. Political space can be created, and that happened a lot in the Balkans. I think to a certain extent happened also on the GCPOA negotiations, but that's a different story. And here comes the role of leadership and the responsibility of political leadership. I spent a lot of time during my 5 years in office in Brussels on the Balkans, both on the Prespa agreement, Greece, North Macedonia, but also on the Serbia-Kosovo dialogue, but also with the reform agenda of all the different countries there to move on with their internal reforms to enter the European Union, to start or to move on with the negotiations. For instance, the justice reform in Albania or other things that all of them did, each at their pace. And I've never seen such a determination and a dedication from the political leaderships of all the 6 partners in the Balkans towards the European agenda. And you still see this reflected in the level of support for the European integration process in some of these countries. I mean, you take Albania, which is the one that I know now best because the college is opening a 3rd campus after 30 years in Tirana. I'm very excited about that. I'm there often now, and I was just looking at the last trends. Around 95-96% of Albanians support the European integration process, which is amazing if you consider, as you mentioned, the delays that have happened on the European side. I was very clear and very candid about that during my mandate. I had a couple of issues on which I felt a lot of frustration when I was in office. One was the migration file, which is a different topic, and the other one was when in 2019 the European Union, the Council didn't decide to open negotiations with North Macedonia and Albania, and I was convinced at the time it was a big mistake, and I was clearly also in an open manner saying that. I think at that time there was a complete miscalculation from some member states about the relevance of that decision. And I think that today those same countries understand and realize and even say publicly that things should have moved before, in particular when it's about Albania and North Macedonia, because they had delivered and the European Union didn't. I think that today the narrative is completely different and the policy is completely different. As sometimes it happens, that's not related to something that is moved in the Balkans, but in Ukraine. The war against Ukraine has made it such that the European Union has realized, finally, better late than never, that the enlargement policy is actually an asset for the European Union. It's the first time that you hear from all the European leadership the same message, that is completing the integration of the European continent, because that is it, is the strongest asset that the European Union can have in the current geopolitical landscape. I think that there is, for the first time, a real perspective for the Balkans to enter the European Union. And I think this is felt in the region. It might not concern all the 6 at once, but I'm pretty sure that I'm a Balkan optimist, and they have heard me saying this several times, so they might be skeptical about what I'm saying, but I'm really confident that this will happen, at least for some of the Balkan countries, relatively soon. Even to their surprise, probably, because some of them have stopped believing in that. They still wish to see that happening, but maybe they're a bit disillusioned, understandably so. But I think that will happen.
È stato un piacere sentirla parlare oggi.
Oh, complimenti, ottimo italiano.
I lived near Trieste for a few years, and my question is about migration and immigration. Recently, last week, the Italian government reinstated border checks along Koper with Slovenia, and like seeing many, migrants myself come through the Balkan routes, and now with the Meloni government and certain new restrictions about migration. How do you see the European Union as an entire body sort of change the certain rules in the framework, or at least like redistribute the amount of resources that goes into the migratory flows and who handles migratory flows? Because when you have like citizens in Pantelleria or Lampedusa see thousands and thousands of migrants, how are you able to keep a consensus in synergy between the different countries, the ones in the Nordic countries or the Baltic countries, are not seeing those thousands and thousands of migrants?
How much time can I take to answer that question?
I would prefer you to be as brief as possible, just
I
because
will
we've
try
been
my
talking
best,
for about an
yes.
hour. Sorry.
I will try my best. It's not less complex than the situation in the Middle East, meaning that it's not comparable, but meaning that on one side, and I'll try to be short, but on one side, sometimes we make a lot of confusion between migration and refugee flows. It's two totally different things that have two different legal frameworks and two different ways of handling things. But in the common sense, in the narrative, in the communication, and sometimes in the politics of it, it all mixed. In reality, we have two different elements. One is the migratory flows mainly from sub-Saharan Africa to Europe that takes the Mediterranean route. And that is definitely not going to stop, is not going to go away, and it's very much needed if you look from a purely rational point of view. Europe needs migrants because of our demographics. The entire European welfare system and economic system would collapse without migrants. The point is that we do not have enough and transparent enough and functional enough regulated manners to enter Europe. So you don't have enough or proper regular migration channels that would be healthy and needed. And this fuels, together with economic interest of criminal organizations and networks, the irregular migration flows. On the refugee side, it's mainly from other parts, Middle East, Afghanistan, the Horn of Africa. And these are asylum seekers, and these numbers are much smaller and can be managed and should be managed in a completely different manner through the international regulated ways, UNHCR, and there is a matter of sharing responsibility among European countries that is not there. The numbers are not immense. The numbers are quite small, actually. The problem is that if small numbers, I mean relatively small numbers, if you consider that, if I'm not wrong, I don't have the updated numbers in mind, but if you consider that most of the refugee and migrant flows happens in the world happens among African countries, not towards Europe or towards the United States. The vast majority of refugees and migrants move south-south, not south-north. So relatively, the numbers that come to Europe are relatively smaller and fully sustainable. The problem is that if these relatively small numbers only come or stop in 1, 2, 3 member states, the frontline member states, this is hard to be sustained in the immediate terms and in the long run because you don't have a redistribution system of the asylum seekers or of those that have received asylum status. We have different elements of the issue and we have different problems that relate to different elements of the system. One element is the lack of functional regular migratory systems and routes. The second element when it comes to asylum seekers and refugees is the lack of internal solidarity on redistribution, which for me is a shame, as simple as that. Also because, and you didn't mention that, but I will do it myself, when you see the way in which the European Union has dealt with the refugees from Ukraine, you see a completely different attitude, right? And this is also for me a shame, because a refugee is a refugee, no matter the color of the skin or the religious background. And I'll be very open on that. Clearly, here you see two different standards, and to me this is not acceptable. I'm very happy that Europe has been open and very welcoming to Ukrainian refugees and will continue to be so. But I wish and I hope that we can learn the lesson and apply the same standards, the same kind of attitude, and learn some lessons when it comes also for refugees that come from different parts of the world. I don't see this happening, and this is for me a very heavy limit, because no matter how small or big the numbers are, without a system of internal solidarity among member states of the European Union, this will not be sustainable. But the numbers are not that big. The problem is that if you mix the numbers, then it grows to limit to numbers that are definitely bigger. But if we took the entire thing from a purely rational perspective and take all the politics away of that, this would be perfectly manageable.
So much would be perfectly manageable if we took the politics out, right?
Yes. Sometimes the politics helps creating spaces for
Indeed.
political agreements or multilateral agreements that otherwise wouldn't be possible if you didn't have the political leadership.
Yeah, absolutely.
So sometimes politics can also help the policy, sometimes.
Federica Mogherini, thank you very much indeed for speaking with us. Thank you. We could have talked for 2